Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Founders Day virtual program, and happy birthday to Mount Sinai Morningside. It's the 175th year that we've been around, and it's my pleasure to introduce Art Gianelli to get things started.
Hey, Kat, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So let me start by welcoming all of you who are joining us to celebrate the 175th anniversary of the founding of St. Luke's Hospital. The famous British politician and historian Lord Acton once wrote that, quote, "History is not a burden on the memory, but an illumination of the soul," unquote. These words easily apply to St. Luke's Hospital. For throughout its 175-year history, St. Luke's Hospital, now Mount Sinai Morningside, has served as the soul of healthcare in New York City. The vision of its founder, Reverend William Augustus Muhlenberg, was to establish a hospital, there were only really two at the time in New York City, committed to providing care to everyone who stepped through its doors, regardless of their capacity to pay for the care that they received. Reverend Muhlenberg gathered the funds to construct St. Luke's Hospital at Fifth Avenue between 54th and 55th Streets in Manhattan, opening its doors to patients in 1858. After his death, St. Luke's was rebuilt at 113th and Amsterdam Avenue, where we know it is today. Once uptown, St. Luke's Hospital, along with Columbia University and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, constituted an oasis of healing, learning, and spirituality that was certainly unrivaled in New York City and perhaps even the nation. St. Luke's Hospital has played a pivotal role in the history of healthcare in the city and the country. St. Luke's has been home to numerous medical and surgical innovations. Its clinicians tended to the wounded from multiple wars, the injured from the Titanic, and those who contracted HIV during the AIDS crisis. The physicians and nurses at St. Luke's Hospital cared for those afflicted with the Spanish flu in 1918, and just over 100 years later, their successors at Mount Sinai Morningside did the same, with the same grace, courage, and skill for New Yorkers afflicted with COVID-19 during the pandemic we are struggling through today. We, all of us who work at and support Mount Sinai Morningside, are the proud custodians of Reverend Muhlenberg's vision. Though the name St. Luke's Hospital has passed into history, the soul of this great institution has not. For at the core of its being, Mount Sinai Morningside remains to this day a home for clinical innovation, as well as a safe harbor for all who continue to come through its doors, especially those at society's margin. That's what this ceremony is all about, the illumination of the soul of Mount Sinai Morningside. Before concluding my remarks, I would be remiss if I did not thank Norma Braun, Michaela Biondi, and everyone who dedicated so much of their time to developing the program to honor the 175th anniversary of St. Luke's Hospital. I would like to thank Michaela for curating a display about the history of St. Luke's Hospital in the Annenberg lobby of the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Norma and Michaela remind us every day of the words of William Faulkner, who once wrote, "History is not was, it is." They ensure that those who founded this wonderful hospital will not be forgotten, and they remind us to shepherd this hospital influenced by a vision of healthcare set long ago by Reverend Muhlenberg. In addition, I want to recognize the efforts of Laura Friedman and the Morningside Heights Historic District Committee to secure signage on 113th Street and Amsterdam Avenue that recognizes the importance of St. Luke's Hospital to the history of healthcare in New York City and the nation. The historic marker should be erected by the middle of 2022, and hopefully will be standing 175 years from now, reminding our descendants of the legacy of Reverend Muhlenberg and this great institution. Finally, Norma gently reminded me to encourage the submission of nominations for our inaugural Muhlenberg Awards, which replaces the President's Recognition Awards as a means of celebrating the outstanding efforts of our colleagues in advancing the values of Mount Sinai Morningside. Those values include teamwork, empathy, transparency, creativity, optimism, safety, agility, and most importantly, equity. Nominations are due no later than Monday, November 1st. So what I'd like to do now, actually, is read a letter that came from the Manhattan Borough President's office, Gail Brewer's office, who wanted to say a few words in recognition of this important day. To acknowledge the organizations and individuals who are committed to improving our city and enriching the community, Gail Brewer, the president of the Borough of Manhattan, on the 175th anniversary of our hospital's founding, proclaimed October 18th, 2021 as Mount Sinai Morningside Day in the Borough of Manhattan. In her letter, she speaks about how our hospital has been a vital part of this community for the past 175 years, and that Mount Sinai Morningside, formerly known as St. Luke's Hospital, has been a lifeline to our local community's access to healthcare, and how our hospital and its workers have always been dedicated to giving back to others in need. We want to thank her for this tremendous honor, for this day of recognition for St. Luke's Hospital and Mount Sinai Morningside. Again, thank her for recognizing this special day. So with that, I believe I turn the proceedings over to Norma. Norma, you there? Norma, are you on mute? Kat, is Norma on mute?
She is off mute. I'm asking her to start her video, so
Okay.
1 second.
Sure. No worries. Yeah, but we can't hear her.
Norma, we cannot hear you. Is your sound on?
What it is,
There we go.
can you hear me now?
Yes, maybe turn it up a bit more.
I don't know what I've maximized it already as much as I can.
But that's good. Just speak up.
I will speak up. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Arthur, so much for not only your wise words, but also your support in allowing us to get this whole thing together with a fantastic group that we've had to work on this. But I want now to go quickly to our 125th celebration video, followed by a short clip to bring us to 2021. So Kat, will you start that video?
New York City, the great melting pot. More than 7 million people of every race, creed, color, and national origin. People whose forefathers saw the city as the gateway to freedom, the ticket to a better life in a place called America. They arrived in ever-increasing numbers, dreamers and doers, fathers and mothers who worked hard to give their children a new beginning in the land of opportunity. By the mid-19th century, the island known as Manhattan was home to more than 500,000 people. The arrival of each immigrant meant a new face, another worker, and one more person to care for. In November of 1871, the Reverend William Augustus Muhlenberg, who founded St. Luke's Hospital 25 years earlier at 54th Street, climbed into his carriage and headed uptown. He must have had a lot on his mind that night. The west side of Manhattan was changing rapidly. Hospital beds were in short supply. Yet the Reverend seemed optimistic. Help for his beloved West Side was on the way. For tonight, he would formally bless the Roosevelt Hospital on the occasion of its opening. Perhaps he also had an intuition that more than 100 years later, the hospital he had built and the hospital he would bless would become one and work together for the common good. Today, the west side of Manhattan and Harlem communities are more ethnically diverse than ever. Nearly 500,000 people live between 34th and 142nd Streets. With two divisions, one midtown and one uptown, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center is the community's only full-service health care provider. And while the technology is state-of-the-art, the challenge remains timeless. In the mid-19th century, healthcare existed primarily as a privilege for those who could afford it. But the young Reverend Muhlenberg, a dedicated Episcopal clergyman, believed that healthcare was the right of all people. He saw hospitals as the distinguishing institutions of Christendom. So, in 1846, on the Festival of St. Luke, the Reverend appealed to his congregation for funds to create a hospital with a special mission to serve New York's most needy. That day, the Church of the Holy Communion pledged $30 toward the realization of Reverend Muhlenberg's dream. 12 years later, St. Luke's Hospital received its first guests at 54th Street and 5th Avenue. The hospital's motto, to heal the body, to save the soul. In 1863, James Henry Roosevelt, a member of one of New York's first families, passed away, leaving a bequest of nearly $1 million for the founding of a second hospital to help the city's most needy. At age 30, he had fallen gravely ill and devoted his remaining years to amassing the funds necessary to make his dream come true. The Roosevelt Hospital opened its doors on November 2, 1871, at 59th Street and 9th Avenue. That night, Reverend Muhlenberg of St. Luke's Hospital offered the benediction, and the Reverend Thomas Vermilye, a boyhood friend of Mr. Roosevelt's, offered these words of encouragement. The Roosevelt Hospital now begins its benevolent work, and we pray for it a career of great usefulness. 7 years after opening, St. Luke's Board of Managers reported there have been 100 more patients than in the year preceding, making the whole number treated since the opening some 35,000. The majority of these, except for their resort here, would have lingered or died in the wretchedness of tenement houses. From the time Roosevelt Hospital opened, many of New York's most distinguished physicians served on the staffs of both Roosevelt and St. Luke's. Dr. Charles McBurney documented the operative management of acute appendicitis. Dr. Richard Hall performed America's first successful operation for the removal of a perforated appendix. In 1892, a state-of-the-art operating theater was built at Roosevelt through the generous gift of William J. Sims. With seating for 185 physicians, the Sims Theater would be the scene of Dr. McBurney's famous operations and a renowned center of learning for outstanding surgeons to come. By the late 1890s, charity patients accounted for more than 70% of the whole number treated at St. Luke's. Under increasing pressure to meet the needs of a growing community and with no room to expand on Fifth Avenue, the hospital's Board of Managers decided to build a larger and better equipped facility farther uptown. On January 24, 1896, St. Luke's officially moved to 113th Street and Morningside Drive. By all accounts, the new facility was magnificent. Designed by the daring young architect Ernest Flagg, the new St. Luke's was patterned after the Luxembourg Palace in Paris. With its pavilions, clock tower, and dome, it reflected the classical palace hospitals of the 17th century. Wards were arranged so that the sun could enter windows on 3 sides during the course of a day. In keeping with the spirit of its founder, the hospital's chapel made a striking first impression. Its architectural grandeur and picturesque location made St. Luke's an ideal place to get well. By the turn of the century, New York was booming. Commerce and industry were growing at an unprecedented rate. Immigration levels were at an all-time high, and the city began to expand uptown. The new subway spawned low-income housing, taking thousands of New York's working-class people farther up the West Side. Once surrounded by farmlands, St. Luke's now found itself at the heart of a new community. In the early 1900s, doctors George Brewer and Louis Cole of Roosevelt developed the serial plate method of X-ray diagnosis of gastric lesions, an important step forward in imaging techniques. Francis Carter Wood, a surgeon and pathologist at St. Luke's, pioneered diagnostic applications of X-rays and would later gain international fame for his research in the field of cancer. By 1912, Roosevelt Hospital had established a social service department. 2 years later, St. Luke's founded its social service division. The broad-based volunteer service included child welfare and TB patient care, cases that were often turned away by other hospitals. Upon the entry of America into World War I, both St. Luke's and Roosevelt were called upon to provide a service that had come to distinguish them in past conflicts. More than 100 doctors from among St. Luke's alumni and 200 graduates of the School of Nursing were enrolled in the various services during the war. Roosevelt doctors and nurses served at Base Hospital number 15 during some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Years later, General John Pershing would say, "The splendid record of service of the medical unit at Base Hospital number 15 will be remembered by all who served." As America and New York roared into the 20s, Babe Ruth was belting home runs for the Yankees, and Jack Dempsey was slugging all comers at Madison Square Garden. Down on Wall Street, people were making more money than ever, but the bubble was about to burst. When the stock market crashed in 1929, America plunged into the Great Depression. Despite the crisis, St. Luke's and Roosevelt never wavered in their devotion to the West Side community. In 1934, an efficiency expert who surveyed St. Luke's Hospital reported, "St. Luke's is perhaps the outstanding institution in the city. There is an atmosphere of charity, faith, and humane consideration for suffering which is admirable and unsurpassed elsewhere." From the beginning, volunteers provided an important link between medical services and the personal needs of patients. Many volunteers came from the Christian community, which continued to be a strong support system for both hospitals. Over at Roosevelt, Dr. Arthur Antonucci, the son of Italian immigrants who would later become the premier diagnostician of his time, began his distinguished career. In 1941, America found itself at war again and called upon the nation's hospitals to come to the aid of its troops overseas. From 1942 through 1945, St. Luke's and Roosevelt Hospital physicians and nurses treated more than 60,000 patients with a success never before attained in the care of battle casualties. These life-saving mobile evacuation hospitals were the forerunners of the famous MASH units of wars to come and provided an invaluable service. One officer wrote, "The high quality of professional care rendered has not only resulted in the saving of many lives, but the speedy recovery and prompt return of patients to their units." After the war, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, like the rest of America, went back to work. The baby boom was in full swing, and the community was once again growing rapidly. The hospitals were as busy as ever. The medical establishment was pushing for a more academic approach to physician training. Teaching programs were becoming more and more important to attracting top candidates for the house staffs of all hospitals. A former chief of medicine remarked, "In the final analysis, the quality of the medical care St. Luke's could provide was the product of the quality of the professional staff we could attract." In 1947, St. Luke's formally affiliated with the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. Roosevelt soon followed suit, bringing both into the ranks of full-fledged university teaching hospitals. One surgeon described it this way: "The rich heritage of teaching shined brightly in those days. The senior attending staff would spend hours teaching, even in the halls or at lunch. They were dedicated people, willing to pass on what they knew for the benefit of patients." During the 1950s, Roosevelt Hospital became a clear leader in medical advances. Its hand surgery service and residency training programs were established by Dr. William Littler. Even today, these programs rank among the finest of their kind in the world. Meanwhile, St. Luke's was busy expanding its service to the community by incorporating New York's renowned Women's Hospital as its women's division. Dr. James Marion Sims, along with a group of 35 socially prominent women, had established Women's Hospital in 1855, a New York City facility dedicated to treating conditions specific to women. The first great gynecologic surgeon, Dr. Sims pioneered many techniques in his field and eventually became president of the American Medical Association. About the time Dr. Jonas Salk was discovering a cure for polio, surgeons at St. Luke's were performing New York's first open heart procedure. In the coming decade, St. Luke's would rank among the top open heart surgery centers in the world. By the mid-1960s, New York had an industrial workforce of nearly 1 million, and while the decade was marked by social unrest, the two hospitals remained protective of the city's most vulnerable. The first Senate hearings on the increasingly widespread problem of child abuse were held at Roosevelt Hospital. A decade later, St. Luke's developed pioneering programs for early recognition and prevention of this alarming threat to family life. By the time the 1970s rolled around, New York and the Upper West Side had changed even more than Reverend Muhlenberg could have imagined. Like many urban centers, health care in the city was in a tailspin. Medicare and Medicaid had changed the way hospitals did business. It was becoming more and more costly to maintain high levels of care. So in 1979, St. Luke's made the pioneering move to join forces with Roosevelt, forming St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center. This merger brought together two hospitals that had always shared a common cause: to care for the community's most needy. Today, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center remains the lifeline of Manhattan's West Side and Harlem communities, from 34th to 142nd Streets and from Central Park West to the Hudson River. It is home to 1,200 attending and 500 house staff physicians, 1,100 nurses, nearly 5,000 other staff members, and hundreds of volunteers. Even in the face of managed care, funding cutbacks, and the demands of doing more with less, the work continues. For From Independence Square and its innovative approach to rehabilitation to the increasingly popular birthing center, from the pediatrics department, which boasts the city's lowest infant mortality rates, to the state-of-the-art heart center, St. Luke's Roosevelt carries on a tradition of preeminent medical care. The Theodore B. Van Italy Center continues its groundbreaking work in nutrition and weight management, while the legacy of Dr. Littler lives on in hand surgery. The emergency department treats nearly 100,000 visits a year, and medical research continues on all fronts, including treatment for AIDS. Today, as in the past, St. Luke's Roosevelt depends on a long list of benefactors. Names such as Vanderbilt, Morgan, and Hearst have been joined by Smithers, Miller, Doubleday, Babcock, Abbo, and many others. Their generosity enables the hospital center to carry on its important mission. As Reverend Muhlenberg said upon realizing his dream 150 years ago, "Blessed be God for this good and happy day. The seed is planted, and I trust by the hand of him who will not let it die."
Chat, you have to go ahead.
It's 1 second, pulling it up.
Yep. We're now entering the 21st century and bringing up to date.
My name's Brian Radville, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Mount Sinai Morningside. As the CMO of Mount Sinai Morningside, I have the distinct privilege and honor of working with so many talented and dedicated physicians and staff. It is indeed my honor to be here. It's a joy to see such an engaged group of individuals working for one goal, which is really to give the best patient care and the best patient experience possible.
My name is Dr. Donna Mendez. I am an associate professor of surgery here at Mount Sinai.
I am Jean Baer. I have been part of the St. Luke's Roosevelt family since 1967.
As Robert Lombardo, and when I left St. Luke's, I was an attending physician in the Department of Medicine.
I'm George Durmbexian. I was senior attending physician and cardiologist at St. Luke's.
Because we pride ourselves on providing the best emergency care in the city. Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Weiner, Chairman of Emergency Medicine at St. Luke's and Roosevelt Hospitals. Not only is the technology in our emergency department state-of-the-art, so is our approach to handling emergency cases.
As St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital physicians, we were fortunate to inherit the distinguished and proud achievements of our forefathers, and to be given the opportunity to further contribute to the medical accomplishments of the institution.
Formerly, these two hospitals were Mount Sinai St. Luke's and Mount Sinai Roosevelt, and even before that, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center. We have a long tradition of excellence, ingenuity, and compassionate care for our community. Radiology is such a unique specialty that touches so many patients throughout multiple episodes of care.
Whatever you do, persist not only in your learning, but work so hard to be involved with your medical community. But as a result of that, you're going to be involved with community in general. The great community that exists that makes life and people.
How long for you?
30 years. I celebrated last year. And she celebrated
30 years this year. So.
Yeah, we're the older ones.
We love it here.
Hi, my name is Dr. Janine Albu, and I'm a professor of medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in the Division of Endocrinology, Diabetes and Metabolism of the Mount Sinai Morningside and West Hospitals. I have actually completed my fellowship in the division in 1987 At that time, the division was part of the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons in the Department of Medicine of the St. Luke's and Roosevelt hospitals. I stayed on as faculty, and I'm a former fellowship director and chief of the division. The endocrinology division at the two hospitals has a rich history and is nationally, internationally famous for the expertise in the research and treatment of obesity and its comorbidity, type 2 diabetes.
We have a cutting-edge vascular service, which offers a range of acute interventions from IV and endovascular treatment of ischemic strokes to minimally invasive surgical evacuation of intracerebral hemorrhages.
That is all for the videos. Norma, do you want to come back on?
You have to, here we go. Anyway, thank you so much. And that we need obviously even better video than that, but this is the first go around for this. Anyway, I'm so pleased to be able to include some of the people who made the history here so strong as you have seen parts of. So I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Janet Mackin, who is retired Dean of the Nursing School. Janet joined our St. Luke's family the year before we married St. Luke's with Roosevelt. And she was a med-surg nursing instructor, and she became director of nursing education and corporate director of training and development. And then she went on to become the dean of the Phillips Nursing School. And then she retired, now busier than ever in retirement, joining us today and in writing, volunteering, and spending time with family and traveling as well. Janet, is a thrill for me to introduce you to this portion of our history.
Norma, I'd love to thank you for the introduction. Today, am I full screen now?
Kat, let's do it.
Kat, great.
Sorry, Janet.
Are you there?
Should be. Yeah, she started. Here we go.
Okay. If you could just, yes, put it into slide mode. I'd like to say thank you to Norma for allowing me to do this presentation today. It is quite an honor. It's also quite a challenge because you have given me 5 minutes in which I can review 86 years of the history of the school. Let's see if I can do it. Before I begin, let me say that this presentation is dedicated to the 4,000 graduates of the School of Nursing here. And I want to give sincere thanks to a special person named M. M is for Mary Edgar. She graduated with class of 56. She's also the person who maintains the Alumni Association's website. Without M's help, I would not have been able to do this program. Thank you, M. Next slide, please. The training school emblem, it's a beauty. The TSN stands for Training School for Nurses, which is what it was first called. You can also see the words Corpus Sanare, Animam Salvare, and that means to heal the body, to save the soul. That was the motto of both the hospital and the School of Nursing. It created the mission for both of them. Next. The history of nursing and the School of Nursing at St. Luke's is really about strong women. And we'll start with Annie Ayres. She was called Annie because that was her preference, not Anne. She actually became a sister because of Dr. Muhlenberg. Dr. Muhlenberg gave her that honor in spite of the fact that there was no order of Sisters of the Holy Communion. He actually had to invent the order of the sisters in order to make her the first sister. And Dr. Muhlenberg was well aware of what Annie and her sisters did for the institution. He said, no sisters, no St. Luke's. I say, no Annie, no St. Luke's. Annie died in 1896, but she's actually in a strange way still with us. If you're in Muhlenberg lobby, just opposite the chapel, take a look and you'll see this beautiful portrait of her. It was done by Daniel Huntington and it was done in 1877. Really a nice testimony to a very important woman for St. Luke's. Next slide. Okay, strong women. Here are a few more. The class of 1890 was made up of only 6 graduates. In the center of this picture is Anna Maxwell. At least I think that's her because she was the 2nd director of the School of Nursing. Surrounding her are 6 students. One of those students is Dr. Wallstein Tompkins. Dr. Tompkins actually started as a nurse student and did so well as a nurse, she became director of the School of Nursing. She did that for a number of years, and then she decided she wanted to go back to school, and she got herself into medical school at Buffalo. She then went on to a career as in gynecology and is a very wonderful graduate of the program. Sophie Ernst in the middle picture there, she graduated in 1896. She's in such a lovely, leisurely pose. It makes you think that life was easy for students at that time. Not so. Sophie worked very hard, most likely 13-hour shifts throughout the program. The uniform on the right shows the type of uniform that was used in the 1940s or 50s, much more practical to say the least. But there is a similarity between the uniform that was worn in the first class and the uniform that was worn in the last class of the program. And that is they all had a blue and white check material. So there's a nice tradition there. Now, I said strong women, and I say that in this case too, because the most desirable age for women to enter the program was somewhere between 20 and 35. So mature women, not young women out of high school. In fact, they actually changed the age as time went on. It was 23 to 35. Next slide. So the uniform was very symbolic. And as you can see here on the right, there's a carefully boxed set of the uniform. The uniform belonged to Gertrude Kilburn. She was actually a graduate of the class of 1926. The uniform came to us from her niece. Her niece was Valerie Kilburn. Now here's the family history. Valerie became nurse in the footsteps of her aunt. The cape on the right is actually a reminder to me, not just of the cape that was worn at St. Luke's, but also of the cape that my mother wore when she graduated her nursing program in 1945. That tradition definitely continues. I became a nurse. My 2 sisters became a nurse. My 3 nieces became a nurse, and 1 niece is in nursing school as we speak. Next slide. There's lots of traditions, and the cap stands very high in that long tradition. You saw it in the video that you just watched, and you see the history of it in front of you. The cap started early in 1855 with Florence Nightingale. It went on through the generations, and as you can see, changed slightly as it went along. Now, the cap is more than just a headwear. It actually is symbolic of that long tradition. It's also identity. The nurses who wore these caps knew the caps of all the additional schools in the area and beyond. In fact, in 1890, the cap that they wore was very similar to the one that was worn at Massachusetts General Hospital. So it was really symbolic and remained so till 1974 with the graduating class, the last year of the school. The cap was also an evidence of rank. So you can see in 1935, that nurse is wearing a cap with a black velvet thick band around it. That indicated she was a graduate. The others were students, as in fact, that one is wearing the Dutch cap in the 1949 photo. She was a probie. She had just finished her period, allowing her to become a full student in the program. So it also indicated the importance of the school's tradition as it goes forward into the future. So let's go to the next slide. When you look at these pictures from the past, there's a certain charm and sentimentality to them. Unfortunately, what I also see is a great risk of infection. But as the students were in school taking care of patients under these circumstances, they actually did receive compensation. In 1893, the students were paid $10 a month. That would be equal to about $300 today. Upon graduation, those students could go beyond and they could do private duty nursing, and that would be at $3 a day, quite an advance. Next slide. There was off-duty time for the nursing students and the nurses, not much, but some. They might spend their time in the lounge of the nurses' residence, or they might take a walk around the neighborhood. As you can see in this photo on the left, the grassy area is very close to the hospital, as well as to St. John the Divine, although at that time, St. John the Divine was still under construction. It looks like that was a golf course, but I feel certain that the nursing students were not playing golf there. Now, maybe in their off-duty time on a Friday, they would choose to go to a tea ceremony that started in the beginning, and that ceremony continued till the end of the school. The students would put on their full dress uniform and join their faculty and director in this very elaborate tea ceremony. My guess is, though, for these students, these nurses, as soon as they finished their day's work, their 13-hour day's work, they would immediately go back to the nurses' residence, kick off their shoes, lay down, and fall asleep. Next slide, please. The graduates of the program. I think if you look carefully at each and every one of these graduating classes, you'll see a similarity. There's great pride these young women have. It's pride in their accomplishments as students, clinically and academically. They are also poised. They're poised for the future in which they can help their patients and others. Next slide, please. The nurses, the graduates of the program, were in service. In World War I, as you heard in the video, nurses helped with war effort. 197 graduates were engaged in war service. In addition, 48 graduates were Red Cross home defense nurses. Similarly, in World War II, the second evacuation hospital unit was made up of 124 graduates of the program and medical staff who cared for 49,000 patients. As mentioned in the video, nurses and nursing students also helped people during the pandemic of 1918. They were immunized against typhoid fever, smallpox, scarlet fever, diphtheria, but unfortunately, there was no immunization against influenza. Next slide. The need for nurses changed over the years, sometimes more in demand and sometimes less. In 1943, the Roosevelt administration realized there was a great need for nurses. So that administration formed the U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps to encourage young women to come into the program. They would be given uniforms, books, room and board, as well as scholarship aid. To make it even more appealing, they received a stipend. You can see the nurses, nursing students or graduates, I'm not quite sure, on the left wearing their uniforms. The white uniform is for summer and the other uniform is the winter one. Next slide, please. Okay, by far, the most important graduate of the School of Nursing was Mary Breckenridge. Mary became a nurse in 1910 when she graduated from the program. She really did this against the odds. She came from a rather well-to-do family. Her grandfather was vice president under Buchanan. Her father was ambassador to Russia, but she set her mind to becoming a nurse. After losing her husband and 2 children, she decided she wanted to make a change. She had learned of the terrible situation in the rural area of Kentucky. So she gathered a group of women and made the Frontier Nursing Service a reality. Together, they went to these areas that were so remote that there was no choice but to use horseback to get there. Their mission was really to provide medical and midwifery services. To say the least, she was very successful. The mortality rates for infants and the infection rates for mothers were actually lower in those areas than those, the average for those in the country. She was rewarded in some ways by having a stamp made in her honor. In addition, Mary had a school named after her as well as a hospital. Next slide. Okay, I love this picture. It's a picture of Barbara Edwards. She graduated in 1960 from the School of Nursing. Barbara started working at St. Luke's immediately after graduation. She worked her way up from staff nurse, eventually taking on the position of director of nursing recruitment. Barbara's smile says it all. She loved working at St. Luke's. She always went above and beyond the call of duty. As you can see in this photo, she's making up baskets of toys for the children in the hospital. Thank you, Barbara, for all you've done. And I think you probably still have a smile on your face. Next slide, please. This image, I think, is really quite powerful. It's a woman representing charity, helping a man with a sling on his arms. It's very evocative of the period, and it's quite moving. It's actually done on the cover of Puck magazine in 1886. And the title below it says, "Remember Hospital Sunday." It was encouraging people to donate. You can see the donation boxes on either side of the image. But let's look a little closer. If you could change slides. And you will see, if you look carefully, on the left, that's St. Luke's Hospital. On the right, that's Mount Sinai. Who knew that those hospitals would someday come together and be under one umbrella? Quite an interesting foretelling of the future. Next slide. I want to end this presentation where I started. I want to thank the graduates, the founder, and the faculty of the St. Luke's School of Nursing. You led quite amazing careers, and I'm really very proud of you. And Mary, or I should say M, not being a graduate of the School of Nursing, I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so much for your help. I also want to acknowledge the modern day heroes of Mount Sinai Morningside. And of course, top of the list is Norma Braun. You're amazing, Norma. I appreciate your dedication, your leadership, and your love of St. Luke's history. I'd also like to thank our wonderful archivists, our current archivist, Michaela Biondi. You helped me with this presentation, and I greatly appreciate that. Nancy Pinella, I've known you for years, and you've always been the ultimate archivist and librarian. You're just terrific. Of course, the nurses at Mount Sinai make Mount Sinai Morningside what it is today. I thank Marcia and her wonderful staff. The nurses give of their whole self every day with heart and soul. Thank you very much, everyone. I give my best wishes to all the viewers, and I look forward to, well, at least another 100 years in the program. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I ask you now to commit to presenting another 100 years?
It's a deal.
Thank you very, very much. It was so enjoyable and informative. And now I have the privilege to present to you Dr. George Green. He's a cardiovascular surgeon, pioneered microsurgery in 1968, and was the first to harvest the internal mammary artery for coronary bypass surgery. He joined St. Luke's in 1970, which performed 1,800 cases a year then. The rest is history. And he and Dr. Cameron produced the incredible long-term survival of their procedure on patients with bypass surgery. And he was also the only thoracic surgeon who had no patients with diaphragmatic paralysis as a consequence of their surgery. So I'm privileged that Dr. George Green decided to join me in my office. And so we're going to change chairs for him to present to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. My life at St. Luke's began in June of 1970. Prior to that, I was working at New York University, and with the financial aid of a National Institute of Health grant, I was able to use the laboratories there to prove that the terminal end of the internal thoracic artery of a dog could be connected to a very distal segment in the range of 1 millimeter of the dog's coronary artery and protect the dog from the instant death that would normally follow from ligation of its left anterior descending artery at its origin. Furthermore, that graft would bring flows of about 15 milliliters per minute. A year following surgery, angiography proved that the anastomoses were widely open, and by 1968, enough data had accumulated to allow me to proceed to clinical application. The initial procedures were successful, but limited facilities at New York University limited the surgery to 1 case per week. Early in 1970, I got a call from Dr. Colin McCord, then director of cardiac surgery at St. Luke's. And McCord said St. Luke's wanted to start a program in coronary surgery, wanted me to begin it and to direct it. That's how I came to move there in 1970 and was allowed to do 3 cases per week, which gradually increased, and ultimately we were scheduling 20 cases per week. Dr. Early Cameron approached me soon after my arrival and said she would like to do prolonged clinical follow-up of every patient having coronary surgery at St. Luke's. She published reports at 10, 15, and ultimately 20 years following surgery. And that is what put St. Luke's on the world cardiological map and brought patients from all over the world for help at St. Luke's and brought surgeons from all over the world to St. Luke's to see what was being done at our hospital. This success allowed extension of the program so that ultimately both internal thoracic arteries were being immobilized, and with laser Doppler flow measurements, I could prove that blood flow to the separated halves of the sternum would not be diminished if the arteries were mobilized in a skeletonized fashion. Then it could be demonstrated that side-to-side anastomoses as well as end-to-side anastomoses could be done, allowing each mammary artery to be used for more than one single anastomosis. And finally, free grafts attached to the aorta of the internal thoracic artery could be shown to be as good as pedicle grafts. This work was documented again by Dr. Cameron 5 years following the surgery. I want to stop here because others have very important issues to address in this celebration of the 175th anniversary. Thank you.
George, thank you so much for coming up here and giving us this little history of the evolution of one of the most successful procedures for restoring blood flow to patients who have had heart attacks or impending heart attacks. And now I want to go to introduce Dr. Gerard Torino, who was chief of medicine here. He has spent a lifetime in research, having started in the military. He was one of the first under the armed services when he was in the service, when he developed dextran as a plasma expander to restore blood pressure and blood loss. Since then, he has been engaged in patient care, education, and research, and he's been doing work continuously, even to this day, on inflammatory processes in the lung causing destruction and methods to reverse that. He was the first key professor of medicine when he became the chair of the joined St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center. And his work in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency is worldwide known and applied research, and he continues to do that work. Dr. Jerry Torino, it's a pleasure and an honor to introduce you.
Oh, thank you so much, Norma, for that kind introduction. In the time that I have, I would like to relate how the James P. Maris Center for Lung Disease came to St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, as the hospitals were named at that time. The time I am referring to is 1992. I had just completed 10 years as the first director of the merged Department of Medicine at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital. I stepped down from that position to devote myself more fully to research being conducted under the support of a program project NIH grant. The ongoing research focused on the connective tissue and cellular functions of the normal lung and how the disease, chronic obstructive lung disease, and especially emphysema, affected that. The research into the causes of pulmonary emphysema was greatly advanced with the discovery in 1963 of a genetic disease in Sweden called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. This disease is due to a genetic deficiency of the major inhibitor of a powerful elastase enzyme in the human body. Failure to inhibit this elastase results in the degradation of lung elastin from birth and the development of emphysema in early adulthood. The discovery of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency for the first time provided a chemical mechanism for the development of pulmonary emphysema, which was applicable to non-alpha-1 antitrypsin emphysema through a protease-antiprotease imbalance hypothesis, since oxidants in tobacco smoke reduce elastase inhibitor function. A gentleman named John Walsh, whose family and he himself, who had the disease, provided public awareness of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. He established the Alpha-1 Foundation based in Miami, Florida, and reached out to me and our Department of Medicine at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital to become a major center in New York and this part of the country for alpha-1 disease. Dr. Edward Eden, attending physician here, applied his practice to the care of patients with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, and Miss Laurie Tartell organized and led the support group for patients with COPD and pulmonary emphysema. Our early research into this new disease demonstrated that the genetically deficient protein was an elastase inhibitor, so patients who had the disease were undergoing a reduction in body elastin, which includes the lung, and the development of pulmonary emphysema at a young age. We also demonstrated biochemically that the development of pulmonary emphysema, we also demonstrated biochemically that postmortem lungs of patients with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency had a lower elastin content compared with the normal lung of a similar age. In 1998, a major event occurred which greatly expanded our center and its capacities. This event was a financial donation to St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital from the Russell Carson Family Foundation to establish a lung disease center to promote and support research in chronic obstructive lung disease, COPD that is, and alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency emphysema. The original donation was $2 million, which allowed the construction of space for the center. The grant provided a pulmonary physiology laboratory, a well-equipped conference center, and doctors' offices for the James P. Maris Center for Lung Disease. The research conducted at that time in the Maris Center predominantly took two directions. One, study of enzymes which had the capacity to degrade lung tissue to produce abnormalities of lung structure resembling human pulmonary emphysema. And secondly, preventing the development of emphysema, which could lead to the discovery of new therapies for COPD and pulmonary emphysema. Dr. Jerome Cantor, a board-certified clinical pathologist, joined our efforts from the beginning of our program, Project Grant, at Columbia Presbyterian, along with other investigators, such as Dr. Inez Mandel, a biochemist with pioneering expertise in elastin tissue biochemistry, Dr. Carl Meyer, an expert in glycosaminoglycan chemistry, and Zacharias Disha, an expert in collagen chemistry. In the early phases of his work, Dr. Cantor studied the effect of instilling the enzyme hyaluronidase into the lungs of experimental animals, such as ferrets and mice. Such instillments produced the destruction of lung tissue resembling pulmonary emphysema in humans. Dr. Cantor demonstrated that the instillment of an enzyme, hyaluronidase, before the instillment of the elastase made the emphysema extremely worse. Also, he determined that administration of the substrate for hyaluronidase, that is hyaluronic acid, before the elastase installation made the emphysema significantly less severe. This observation led to 7 years of study by Dr. Cantor on the protective effect of hyaluronic acid against the effects of exposure to tobacco smoke on animals to produce an animal model of human disease, COPD. While these studies were going on, we had the possibility of advancing studies to develop a biomarker for COPD. At this time, it was recognized biochemically that when elastin tissue whether it be in blood vessels, lungs, skin, that two amino acids that only occur in elastic tissue are released into the bloodstream. These amino acids are present only in elastin tissue and are called desmosine and isodesmosine. They can be detected in body fluids such as blood, urine, bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, and sputum. The chemical linkage of desmosine and isodesmosine in the structural amino acids of elastin make elastin insoluble in tissue. Changes in the concentration of desmosine and isodesmosine in body fluids can be an index of elastin degradation in the body. Since desmosine and isodesmosine are present in body fluids in small amounts, their quantitation was difficult. Early methods of quantification involved creating antibodies to desmosine and isodesmosine to apply methods of radioimmunoassay for quantitation. Developing specific antibodies for radioimmunoassay was difficult, which made the results of the radioimmunoassay variable from the different laboratories in the United States and Europe. This variability reduced the credibility of desmosine and isodesmosine as a biomarker for COPD. At this time, in 1996, our group occupied laboratory space in the Antonucci building at Roosevelt Hospital. Research being conducted by Dr. Seymour Lieberman on female hormones such as estrogens and progesterone was taking place at the Antonucci laboratory, which required the use of mass spectrometry for the quantitation of estrogens and progesterone in female body fluids. I considered the possibility of using mass spectrometry technology to be applied to the quantitation of desmosine and isodesmosine. On that premise, I consulted the mass spectrometry chemists, Dr. Shuren Ma and Dr. Young Wai Lin, to determine their willingness to develop such a method using mass spectrometry. Remarkably, they were willing to create a new method, and within months, they had done so and submitted a paper for publication describing the method, which has now become the state of the art for measuring desmosine and isodesmosine. This biomarker using the mass spectrometry method has been applied in 2 clinical trials in COPD, showing the protective effect of hyaluronan to reduce elastin degradation in COPD in patients. For the last 20 years, we have been able to conduct these studies at the James P. Maris Center. The center continues to exist at Mount Sinai West and Morningside hospitals, with efforts to bring forward hyaluronan clinical therapy for COPD and to have desmosine and isodesmosine as acceptable biomarkers for COPD, accepted by the FDA. At the James P. Maris Center, we have been most fortunate to have the participation of Lori Tartell, who has worked to develop effective patient support groups and to develop research for the Maris Center to the pharmaceutical industry, as well as to professional societies such as Alpha One Foundation, the COPD Foundation, the American Thoracic Society, and the American Lung Association. She also has assisted professors, professional staff Doctors Edward Eden, Gerard Torino, and Lawrence Scherer. The presence of the Mara Center at the Mount Sinai has greatly benefited the quality of patients' care in lung disease and has laid the groundwork for new therapies in COPD and the use of biomarkers for the disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. You gave an incredible history of the years it took, and it tells you how much basic research is so sentinel to advancement in medical care. Now, the only thing to say is when elastin works that way, or anti-elastin factors, do we have a future in curing wrinkling as part of the aging process? But thank you very much. But now I'd like to introduce somebody I know very well, and that's Dr. Carl Braun. And it's not because he's related to me that he's talking today, but rather because of his long history of being here at St. Luke's. He started out as a political theory major. So what did he wind up doing in medicine? Well, he figured he'd try it out for a year, and it wasn't any good, he'd go into something else. But in the meantime, he came to St. Luke's as an intern. He left for his neurological training for 3 years and came back, and he's been here ever since. So in all this time, he's seen not only changes, developing it was a division, neurology became a department, and now it is ongoing, generating increasing advanced therapies and training for the future. He is now the Associate Chief Medical Officer, which I wonder if that's adding to his gray hairs. But let me introduce Dr. Carl Braun.
Thank you very much, Norma. So when asked to speak at the 175th anniversary of the founding of St. Luke's Hospital, I thought this might be the opportunity to look at the changes that have occurred in this hospital since I first arrived as a medical intern in June of 1962. I will say at the outset that putting aside the medical advances, the care provided then can in no way compete with the uniform and consistently high level of care delivered at St. Luke's today. That said, there are things that I miss from 60 years ago, as well as things that I certainly do not miss. So in the next few minutes, in no particular order of importance, I'll cover a few. I do miss the name of St. Luke's given to our hospital by our founder, Augustus Muhlenberg, in 1846. For all who have ever worked within its confines for the past 175 years, the name of St. Luke's has been synonymous with family and to strive to care for our patients as members of our family. Reverend Muhlenberg's vision, regardless of skin color, ethnic origin, religion, or economic condition. It was that original goal of the hospital known as St. Luke's that today we still seek to accomplish. So I do not miss as an intern drawing bloods at 6 a.m. and at 6 p.m. going to the pathology lab to pick up the results to enter by hand into the chart. I do miss the readily accessible nurses' written notes in the chart that often, better than physicians' progress notes, reflected the patient's immediate condition. I do not miss the racial, gender, and ethnic bias towards colleagues and patients that infected not only St. Luke's, but American medicine and our country at the time. The only Afro-American physicians who were geographically full-time at St. Luke's were Doris Weathers of pediatrics and John Hutchinson of cardiac surgery. Patients were admitted to separate buildings, if private to Scrimger or Plant, if ward to Clark or Muhlenberg 3, which was 2 floors of 24 open bed units for men and women respectively. One of the first medical residents who rotated through neurology on my return as a neurology attending was a woman, at that time still a rarity in the hospital. She has remained, in my mind, one of the best residents I ever worked with. Next year, she became the first female chief resident in medicine in St. Luke's history. Linda Lewis went on to repeat that breaking of the glass ceiling trick at Neurological Institute as a neurology chief resident, and subsequently as Dean of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Jewish physicians were excluded from the medical staff of St. Luke's for over 100 years. Miles Schwartz and Jonas Goldstone were both my attendings and subsequently colleagues and friends, and were, to my knowledge, the first Jewish physicians admitted to the physician staff of St. Luke's. Sadly, the racial, gender, and ethnic biases survive today, often in more subtle forms. But our hospital is now actively working to identify and combat such biases is one of the most reassuring initiatives being undertaken. I do miss those voluntary private attendings who admitted from their office their private patients to Scrimger and Plant and served as their primary attending throughout the hospitalization. Those attendings knew their patients with a depth of understanding and with a patient trust difficult to achieve today. There were general surgeons like Mal Moley and Skip Ney, who once they operated on a patient for a hernia became that patient's primary provider for the next ailment. I do miss those ward patients on Clark and Muhlenberg that I cared for as an intern and medical resident who once discharged became my patients to follow in medical clinic. As residents, we prided ourselves in giving every bit as good care for our ward patients as to our private patients. I do not miss the annual salary of $4,000 a year as an intern that went to $5,000 a year as a medical resident. Virtually all of us as medical residents moonlighted to make ends meet. For me, it was making house calls at night for HIP, first in Harlem and then subsequently in the Bronx. I can still remember the fear and uncertainty when my first night call came in. My wife, Norma, literally had to shove me out the door and point me in the right direction. I do miss those voluntary physicians of the St. Luke's neighborhood who in their office practices delivered the patient care for the citizens of the Upper West Side and West Harlem. These internists and general practitioners would come in once a week for medical grand rounds and to visit one or more of their hospitalized patients. I miss them. From the Upper West Side, Ken Weinstein, Richard Collins, and Fred Raffi. From West Harlem, Cecil Marquez, Cecil Broderick, and Major Gear. They were as close to me as the colleagues I saw on a daily basis. I do not miss the limited options for treatment. At the start of my internship, the only measures we had to treat acute congestive heart failure were digitalis, a very tricky drug, mercuhydrin, only a fair diuretic, and rotating tourniquets, effective only for a brief period. With the explosion in therapeutic options in the 1970s, medical decision-making became progressively more complicated. When treatment guidelines made their appearance in the 1970s, many of us attacked them as cookie-cutter medicine. But medicine had advanced at so rapid a pace with expanding therapeutic resources that guidelines were absolutely necessary. And in a few years, as with so many other changes in medicine, were accepted as part of good medical care. I do miss the nurses' caps. I do understand that they had to go the way of the starch white dress uniform. Besides the simple issue of more comfortable nursing attire, there were important hygienic reasons. Apparently, these caps were impossible to keep clean, and gender reasons. Men were graduating from nursing school, that they had to disappear. That said, I recall them being worn with authority and pride. And I do miss the St. Luke's School of Nursing and our Australian nurses. I taught a few classes in the nursing school, including one disastrous demonstration of my performing a lumbar puncture in which, demonstrating a lumbar puncture in which one of the young nursing students, female, as were all the nursing students at the time, volunteered to let me show how to position a patient for the procedure. To this day, I think those students had set me up. In the 1950s 1960s and 1970s, we had a series of Australian nurses rotate in our hospital. They were extremely good and they were extremely funny. Before liquor was banned from the hospital premises, a revered custom was liver rounds held on the roof of the Stuyvesant building every Friday evening at 5 p.m., weather permitting. They were rather sedate affairs compared to the later parties that night across the street on the northwest corner of 113th and Amsterdam, where the Australian nurses had their quarters. I miss the head nurse of Stuyvesant 6 surgical unit, where I spent my required 3-month surgery rotation early on in my internship. That nurse ran the surgical floor with an iron hand. Sadly, I do not recall her name. Residents and surgery attendings alike opposed her rule at their peril. Nonetheless, she treated me with a certain tolerance, advised me what to try when a black and white, otherwise known as Senecot milk of magnesia, failed to conquer a patient's persistent constipation. And she counseled me on how to stay in the good graces of the surgery chief resident, Ron Grunwald. A botched presentation at surgical rounds or failure to enter a lab test into the chart before 6 a.m. rounds could result in being assigned by Ron to second assist Dr. Carl Oakman, one of the most fastidious, respected, and slowest surgeons in the hospital. An 8 to 10 hour radical neck dissection with Dr. Oakman was not unusual. I do not miss the handwritten physician orders and the errors that occurred with those orders. I do miss the handwritten physician history and physical and progress notes replaced by the copy and paste and pre-population of the electronic medical record that raises questions as to what exactly was asked and what exactly was examined of the patient. I do miss those lunches in the hospital cafeteria where at long tables attending general surgeons and internists, urologists and neurologists, neurosurgeons and psychiatrists, mixing indiscriminately, talking hospital and national politics, telling stories of recent ridiculous encounters with patients or hospital administrators, with no one seeming to take themselves too seriously, at least not in public. Free consults were the rule. The various specialties did not, at the time, seem to reside in the silos that exist today. Finally, I do miss attendings, nurses, colleagues, now alas gone, who taught me so much, not only about medicine, but about myself. Sam Thomas, director of neurology, who revealed the neurological examination to be an elaborate and elegant magic act to enchant and educate onlookers. Charlie Begg, the chair of pathology, whose quiet wisdom and equanimity served as a role model, never more evident than in his dying days on Scrimger 3. Ted Van Italy, chair of medicine, who was living proof that one could do nationally recognized research and still be an outstanding clinician. John Hutchinson of cardiac surgery, who could make us laugh at ourselves. Doris Weathers, chair of pediatrics, whose gentle determination overcame so many odds. These and so many more I miss, and I hope my thoughts will reach them all, wherever the shades of departed physicians and nurses go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carl. That was a wonderful, brief run through 60 years of my life. Anyway, I'd like to very quickly introduce Mary Fretz, who is she is one of the anniversary committee members, and she's one of the judges with Jackie Lorio, Danny Lorio's wife, who is a consummate artist on her own, who judged our art submissions for our art contest between Mount Sinai Morningside and Mount Sinai St. Luke's. So Mary will deliver the winners of the very, very hard to determine, lovely, incredible submissions, which you will soon be able to view on our virtual exhibition that we will be putting online for those who wish to review all the beautiful artwork. So Mary, she is the second generation. Her father and her mother worked here at St. Luke's until they ended their careers. And she is an artist in her own right, doing some incredibly beautiful work. Mary, it's a pleasure to have you announce our winners.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm on yet.
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Before I start, I would like to thank Dr. Braun, Norma Braun, and Dr. Carl Braun, Michaela Boyandi, and the rest of the anniversary committee for all the hard work you did for the special event. Without you, this would not have come about. I know I can also speak for Jackie Lorio and thanking you for giving us the honor of being judges. We have been part of St. Luke's Hospital, Mount Sinai Morningside family for over 40 years. Many of you may know me. My family and I have a long history at St. Luke's. My father started his residency in urology in 1947. Shortly after he started, he met my mother here. She was chief of the chemistry lab. I basically started working at the hospital long before I was born. I'm an RN who has worked both here and Roosevelt, Mount Sinai West for the past 40 years. When I was growing up, my parents encouraged me and my sisters to learn different crafts. I started taking pottery classes many years ago, and now I'm addicted to it. I also do other types of artwork, but always seem to come back to pottery. Jackie Laurie, who has also been around the hospital for a long time. As Norma said, she is the wife of Dr. Danny Lorio. I remember meeting him in the streets and her in the streets when I was in high school, only a couple years ago here. She is a sculptor, medalist, and has been in many art shows here and nationally. She has an upcoming show in Katona. She was also a member of the Women's Auxiliary at St. Luke's and participated in many of the art shows that were held at St. Luke's in the past, where both families and employees showed off their artwork. While we were judging the show, we were reminisced about the art show the hospital had many years ago. We hope that this show is the first of many art shows to come. We wanted to congratulate and thank all the artists who submitted pieces in the anniversary art show. We had a very difficult time judging the pieces and deciding which one was best. They were all wonderful. The first place winner is Carlos Rodriguez Jr., Associate Director of Mount Sinai West. It's a photograph called Lightscape or Litscape, I'm sorry. A stunning view from the New Jersey side of the Hudson, New York looking majestic from the outside. The second winner is an acrylic painting by Dr. Kathleen Waugh from the Addiction Psychiatry Division. It is a burst of colors from bright neons to shiny metallic and to creamy matte pastels. Can't read now. The piece is inspired by tropical foliage representing growth and individuality amidst chaos and disorder. Floridian references to this psychiatric term, Floridian psychotic, and aims to increase awareness of mental disorders and creative forces at play. The third place winner is The Shadow of Hope. It's a sculpture by Udrika Boris, Assistant Nurse Manager, Institute for Advanced Medicine. The piece is a syringe along with the creation of a large vial. They're created out of styrofoam and COVID-19 vaccine labels. The labels were removed from syringes from people who have had their COVID vaccines. It is framed in a shadow box created out of wood. Congratulations to all the winners once again. And thank you to the anniversary committee.
So the winners can go to the office of the executive committee on the Muhlenberg lobby on the right. And there, this executive secretary, Prabhawati, will give you your currently the tile that Mary has made for each winner, but you'll get a copy until they're all ready. Then, and your gift cards will be there. You can pick them up accordingly. But thank you, Mary, for a beautiful job. As I said, everyone's a winner in this. It was a wonderful display of different types of art, as well as different levels of depth of emotion that they generated to the observer. Thanks again. We'll now go to Meredith Lissigor, who will give us our benediction and our session today. Thank you so much to the anniversary committee, Michaela, and all the members, which take me too long to name their names, even though they deserve to be, as Mary is one of these members. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Meredith?
Hold on, she is coming up.
Great.
Good afternoon. This marvelous day of history, of spirits speaking of the work that they have loved and that they have fostered, is going to conclude with something a little different. William Augustus Muhlenberg, in his vast spare time, was also an indefatigable liturgist, meaning that he loved to write for church, adapt things for church, create things for church worship. And amongst the things that he did was to translate or transpose almost all the Psalms into singable hymns. In other words, he reworked them to become lyrics to familiar hymn modes. So I'm going to share a piece of one of them, which should be familiar to us all. So bear with me. The Lord himself, the mighty Lord, vouchsafes to be my guide, the shepherd by whose constant care my wants are all supplied. In tender grass he makes me feed, and gently there repose, then leads me to cool shades and where refreshing waters flow. I pass the gloomy vale of death, from fear and danger free, for there his aiding rod and staff defend and comfort me. Since God does this, his wondrous love through all my life extend, that life to him I will devote, and in his temple spend. St. Luke's Hospital was Muhlenberg's temple, and it is one that we in healthcare have kept sacred for him and for his vision for 175 years. Nurses and physicians here have practiced ministries of medicine. And indeed, they have healed bodies and likely saved souls. It has been a place where healers have had visions and asked questions that I would say God answered with saving insights, and made them co-creators of modern medicine with him or her. So today, let us conclude and go forth in humility, but in faith, faith in the wondrous miracles that lie ahead, that will be part of our engagement with continuing medicine and making it better and saving souls and bodies at this temple now known as Mount Sinai Morningside. A blessing on everyone who spoke today and everyone who will follow in their steps. Amen.
Thank you so much. And now, folks, look for future programs of Founder Days, maybe a little bit less complex and long as this one, but we hope that we will continue to engage you as family and then we work together for the common good. Bye.